Hello, and good morning or evening, whenever you happen to be listening to this. I will be discussing several different topics that we have been learning about this semester to answer the question, what is Christian moral reasoning slash Christian ethics? To help answer this question, I will be using sources that we have been reading all this semester, as well as many other sources, both modern and ancient. From the series of many lectures that we received, lecture number 5, Deontology Ethics, Dr. Bryan states that with Kant, we now have the creation of the discipline called ethics, which is universal in scope, and it intentionally sought out the narrative to outdo the church or mosque or what have you, because it doesn't require specificities or specific communities or specific books. It's just a universal moral reason and applying these universal rules. One example is the categorical imperative, which is basically don't do unto others as you would have them do unto you, but instead only do something that you think everyone should do. If you honestly think that cannibalism is a great thing and you think that everyone should be cannibals, everyone should eat people, then that could be a universal truth that people should do. Just looking at the completely secular definition of ethics, the Oxford Dictionary says that ethics is moral principles that govern a person's behavior or the conducting of an activity. So ethics can be looked at as a set of moral principles that guide someone, help them choose between good and bad or right and wrong. However, that once again puts us in an awkward position of defining what is right and wrong, or what is good and bad, let alone defining what is righteous or evil. Christopher Bennett, in the book What Is This Thing Called Ethics, while playing devil's advocate a little bit, he almost takes the stance that ethics on some levels can't exist. It discusses morality and if it is absolute or relative. He says, we should acknowledge that some people will take the enterprise of ethics to be fundamentally flawed from the outset. It has a pretty grand ambition, namely to provide a true and comprehensive theory of right and wrong. This ambition assumes that there are answers to moral questions, that we can get these answers right or wrong. This is one great weakness of ethics when comparing and contrasting ethics versus Christian ethics. Is there a right or wrong, or is it all completely opinion-based? Very similarly, in Christian ethics, a short introduction, Long says, modern ethics emerges when people no longer assume a common transcendent good that pulls all desires towards it. Modern ethics might best be understood as either an acknowledgement that no such end exists, or as a revolt against it. So in some ways, modern ethics exists because many people can't agree with one transcendent good. To use the example of cannibalism again, there have been many cultures throughout history that not only was it culturally acceptable, but it was pretty much culturally suggested to be cannibals. There are even some tribes that still practice cannibalism today. For them, eating human meat is completely acceptable. While it might not be considered a good thing to do, it certainly isn't bad or evil. It's just them being them. However, on the other hand, most cultures consider it to be taboo, and ethically, it is, it's not even a gray zone. It is simply a bad or evil thing to do. So, what would Kant say about this, where some people say it is a universal good to eat human flesh and does pass the categorical imperative, and it would be fine if everyone did that, while a much larger portion of the population thinks the exact opposite, that cannibalism is evil. And once again, the categorical imperative can say that no one should do it. Could it be a universal truth that cannibalism is either bad or good? All of this is to say that there is a reason that ethics or moral philosophy can be kind of a hairy situation. It can mean different things to different people, which is why Kant wanted to find those universal truths. Going back to mini lecture number 5, Dr. Bryan, he says that there are some ethic classes that are philosophy or moral reasoning that are in a secular nature, but still Christian adjacent. Opposed to Christian ethics or moral theology, which is a way to conceive good and bad, right and wrong as relative as related to life, teachings, death, and the resurrection of Jesus Christ, the teachings of the scripture, and the historical teachings of the church. In Christian ethics, in a way, Kant gets his universal truths of right and wrong. It's all laid out in thousands of pages of teachings and history. Now, let's not kid ourselves. There's some wiggle room or some different interpretation of the scriptures and Christ's teachings. This has led to there being roughly 45,000 different Christian churches and denominations. Some churches will say Christ said that thou shalt not kill, plain and simple, so we cannot participate in war. While others will say, well, God commanded Saul to kill every man, woman, and child, and commanded David to go to war multiple times, so obviously there are times that killing is okay. So once again, we can be left in a bit of a hairy situation. In A Primer to Christian Ethics, Brotherton states that there are 3 tasks for Christian ethics. One of them is Christian ethics offers wisdom for how to act faithfully, hopefully, and lovingly in response to a specific form of life, area, or concern or issue. Once again, Christian ethics has the background of what perfect looks like, with the example of Jesus Christ. What is right and wrong through his teachings? That is the main difference between the two. Some forms of ethics can attempt to have universal truths to guide them, or people can just decide what is good and what is bad, or natural laws and the inherent knowledge of what is good and bad. While Christian ethics have literal perfection to help guide them in what is right and wrong. The system that I will be using for this project is the one that I find the most intriguing, albeit very flawed. Utilitarianism. It focuses on maximizing utility for the greatest number of people. I think the main reason I find it so intriguing is because on its surface, it seems like it would be the most good. The only thing it focuses on is getting the greatest good for the greatest amount of people. But as are most things involving ethics, it is not that simple. When looking at the typical trolley problem, I think that every situation in all different types of the trolley problem, the best answer aligns itself with utilitarianism, because in the end, it's always the most good. A runaway trolley is headed towards people tied down on a track. The track has 5 people on it. You can divert the track to a track with 1 person. Whether running over one person or 5 people, switch the track to the 1 would be the utilitarianism answer, and it is the only one I agree with. A version of the trolley problem is the fat man question. The trolley is headed towards 5 people on a track. Your body is too skinny to stop the trolley, so you can't step in front of it to stop it, but a large man next to you is big enough to stop the trolley. Do you push the large man in the way in order to save those 5 people? The utilitarianistic answer is yes, push the large man in the way to save 5 people. Would I do this? In a flight or fight situation, I usually take the third F and freeze. And I'm not sure I can say what I would do on this one, but I think killing 1 to save 5 might be more ethical. In the mini lectures, Dr. Bryan mentions the scenario of a time traveler. Would it be ethical to go back in time to kill baby Hitler, and therefore never having the Holocaust or World War II? Obviously, there would be some drastic, unforeseen consequences, but when faced with killing a baby to stop the Holocaust and World War II that caused tens of millions of deaths, in my opinion, it would be foolish not to kill that 1 baby to save them. The inclusion of the word good is extremely important for the definition of utilitarianism. If the word good got changed to pleasure or entertainment, the definition would be extremely different and could mean something completely different. In the definition of utilitarianism, if the definition of utilitarianism was to bring the most pleasure to the most amount of people is the best ethical solution, then gang rape would be considered ethical. Only 1 person suffered while multiple people enjoyed it. If it was centered around entertainment, the Roman Colosseum would be considered ethical. Only a handful of people suffered and died, and many others enjoyed watching it. That is why the word good is so important in utilitarianism. What brings about the most good? When looking at utilitarianism, it is easy to see that there are many benefits to using this approach when considering leadership. What else do you want from a leader than someone who tries to make the most amount of good? for the most amount of people. And because it is for the most good, for the most amount of people, utilitarianism is primarily a communal system. It considers the community, everyone, and then selects what is good for the most amount of people. When a president is deciding whether or not to go to war, they should not be looking at their individual virtues and deciding that way. They need to consider what would be better for everyone. But this doesn't mean that it can only be a communal system. An individual can make moral and ethical decisions using a utilitarian system. If the decision does not make a difference to anyone else, then the decision becomes what gives the most good for them as an individual. Praying at night by your bed does not affect anyone but yourself and God. That choice is 100% a solitary one. But what creates the most good for you? In Psalm 16:11, we read, in thy presence is the fullness of joy. So while the scripture does not say praying is good so plainly, it does say that being in God's presence gives us joy. So we can surmise that praying at night through the utilitarian system is the ethical choice. One of Jesus' biggest teachings is to love your enemy, which was completely foreign to many that heard this teaching. In Matthew 5, we read, whosoever shall smite thee on thy right cheek, turn to him the other also. It is an amazing lesson that revolutionized Israel. But is it utilitarian? After someone smacks you, what would a utilitarian system do to produce the most good for the most amount of people? The exact opposite of a utilitarian view would be to slap them back. That would produce double the amount of pain. What would showing the other cheek do? It could end up with another slap, which would also produce double the amount of pain. But Jesus is not teaching people, go around and try and get slapped as much as possible. The lesson is to love your enemy. There is a common saying that an eye for an eye makes the whole world blind. Jesus is teaching against that. Showing love to those that hate you is a utilitarian view. Showing love to all is the best way to produce the most amount of good. That's why John 13:34 is extremely utilitarian, saying, a new commandment I give unto you, that ye love one another as I have loved you. Love is good. 1 Corinthians talks about how good love is, and loving everyone, to love everyone is the most utilitarian thing possible. It creates the most amount of good possible. However, there is a huge weakness to the utilitarian system that we have discussed. It can be extremely unfair. In fake scenarios like the one with baby Hitler, it would be extremely unfair to baby Hitler to die as a baby because of something that he would do later. But killing one to save millions is for the most good. According to a utilitarian view, torturing one person to make other people feel joy would be the ethical thing to do. In other words, one perfect being who does not deserve anything bad to happen, having him suffer, beaten, laughed at, and mocked, having a crown of thorns placed upon his head, and nailed to a cross to die so others could experience joy, is very unfair and very utilitarian because it pushes out the most good. Paul also teaches of this unfair act, saying in Romans 5, much more than being now justified by his blood, we shall be saved from wrath through him. Because Jesus suffered so much, we are saved from wrath once again, producing the most amount of good. Going back a few years, Isaiah testifies the same thing, but he was wounded for our transgressions, he was bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement of our peace was upon him, and with his stripes we are healed. I'm going to repeat that. With his stripes we are healed. That is utilitarianism in action. He suffered to put out the most good. The end justified the means. I see the utilitarian system used in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints often. Where it appears most obviously is in the instance of callings. In the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, no one gets paid for the work they do. Local leaders, such as bishops and stake presidents, can spend upward of 20 hours a week serving the people in the church, and they do not earn a cent for their efforts. Sunday school teachers prepare lessons weekly. Primary teachers prepare fun activities for the kids and don't earn any money. They work hard, sometimes enjoying what they do, sometimes not. But they always do it in order to put out as much good as into the world as they can. The service that the members use of the church do in their callings is a utilitarian system of working within the church. Like I said, doing what they can to maximize the good. One point of the church is not clearly utilitarian. It's tithings and offerings and the welfare program. Everyone in the church, man, woman, and child, is tithed 10% of their increase. The tithing is very specifically used for the building and establishing the kingdom of God on earth. It goes to build churches and keep them running. It builds temples. It helps send people on missions if they can't pay for it. It helps with education efforts around the world. Now, if you take out the blessings that we see from paying tithing and just look at the physical aspects of it, tithing does put a lot of good into the world. But even those who have close to nothing and don't know where their next meal is coming from, they're tithed 10% of their increase. Like I said, take away the countless blessings that come from tithing, and that does not seem like a utilitarian view because it does not only focus on the most amount of good. However, tithing is not the only offering that members give. Members also pay fast offerings each month, and as well as many different types of financial contributions. This money goes directly to those in the Lord who need it. Those who are struggling to keep the lights on in their house might not have enough for a decent meal. If there is money left over from fast offerings, and everyone is taken care of in the Lord, the money goes up to the stake level, and then to the district level, and so on. So after everyone gives 10% to the Lord for tithing, those who are left with nothing get taken care of. So once again, taking out the obvious blessings that tithing gives, establishing the kingdom for 10% income for everyone. Like Dr. Bryan says in the mini lecture too, the ends justifies the means because those people are still getting taken care of. While going through the different systems and listening to the different types of ethics in the mini lectures, I found it extremely interesting. It also opened my eyes a bit to what we would be learning. I wish I had listened to these mini lectures much earlier in the class. I think it would have lent some intrigue for the rest of the class, and I would have found everything a little bit more interesting. But one thing became abundantly clear. They all have their own strengths and weaknesses. And I'm going to be using those different systems to look at the issue of homosexuality. So my thesis is, by its nature of producing the most good for the most amount of people, utilitarianism is the most ethical system in which to treat homosexuality. I did want to note as well that I looked it up. I tried to find an answer, but I was getting many different answers, whether the most politically correct thing is to say homosexual or gay or lesbian or bisexual. Just because it was the term used on the actual assignment, I'm going to be sticking with the word homosexual. Once again, I don't want to be politically incorrect. I don't want to step on any toes. But that's the one I'll be sticking with, and I apologize if it's offensive. Okay, so I will be sticking with the utilitarianism view for the second part, and that will be the main system I use to look at this controversial topic. But before I get into using utilitarianism, I think looking at the topic through a few different lenses will help better understand the topic using the utilitarianism lens. The topic that I will be discussing is one that I've had a rocky road with because over the years my stance has changed drastically. I will be discussing homosexuality. So what do other systems, other than utilitarianism, feel about homosexuality? So the virtue ethic. Virtue ethics focus on 4 virtues of prudence, justice, temperance, and courage, which are great virtues to strive for. In Common Callings and Ordinary Virtues, Christian Ethics for Everyday Life, Brent Waters, while speaking of virtue, says, a virtue may be understood as a practice that habituates the good of loving God and neighbor. It is through routine and repetitious acts that we become good and faithful, or virtuous, people. In other words, we become what we do. In addition, virtue ethics teaches that you have to teach others these virtues, which is also great. I just like Christian ethics in many lectures, and just like Christian ethics in many lectures, number 1, Dr. Bryan says that Jesus is the perfect example of what ethics are and what to do. Virtue ethics is learning to understand Jesus, to follow him, copy him, live like him. This cannot be something you do casually or just a day or two. We read in you are what you love, that learning to love God takes practice. Establishing these habits of following him, copying him, and living like him are a lifelong practice that we will never perfect. While most of the four listed virtues would play a huge role in the ethical treatment of homosexuality, I think that justice would do the most. However, the definition of justice is, quote, based on or behaving according to what is morally right and fair, end quote, which is ambiguous because we are trying to decide what the moral and ethical treatment would be. We are then left to look at how Jesus would treat homosexuality and follow and copy him. And as we explored earlier, it is to love everyone. So virtue ethics systems, in summation, to the treatment of homosexuality is to love them. If we were to look at the Old Testament, yes, there are rules about homosexuality. But in these same chapters, we find rules about slavery. So I don't think that we can use those chapters in our current lives to guide about homosexuality or how to treat our slaves ethically. The fourth mini lecture talks about natural law and the natural law approach to ethics. This approach states that everyone has a moral compass or a conscience, or a little voice that drives them to do things and to do good. This approach also says that because this little voice, we don't need to be taught right and wrong. And I think that is a foolish position. While I think that we all have that little voice, I think that it needs to also be taught in regards to homosexuality. It seems like some people have a little voice that tells them to be with, in a romantic way, members of their own gender. While some people also have that little voice that tells them the best thing we can do is to let homosexuals know that they will burn in hell. So for the natural law, we are left with some people practicing, some people hating them because of their practice. Situation ethics, in my opinion, is possibly the least logical. While I think that sometimes we do need to be like Anna, or Anna in the example of Frozen 2. In the example given in mini lecture 3, that all we can do is the next right thing. But having the thought process of this seems like the right thing to do at the moment and who cares about the consequences, I think can land people in hot water and doesn't seem very ethical. Similarly to natural law, some people will think the next right thing will be to be brave and come out of the closet and be with someone of their own gender, while some people will think the next right thing to do is tell them of their sins. Deontological seems like it is very close to being the right one, if there was a right one. And I really like the concept of ought implies can. And if you ought to do something, then you can and should do it. It is also an interesting concept that Kant was wanting the church to do so good at spreading theological truths that they would put themselves out of a job. I'm just not completely sold that there are these universal truths for everyone that aren't directly related to Christ's teachings. Like with homosexuality, one could say that a universal truth should be to love everyone. But would a universal truth also state that man and woman should be together? Historically, deontology also taught that you have to do your duty and follow the rules regardless of how it affects others. Also, using the categorical imperative would not work. A homosexual individual would use the categorical imperative to see if he or she should act on it. However, if everyone did, then the human population would end within a century. So out of the other systems of ethics, when asking what the ethical treatment of homosexuality, we are left with love them, ethically they shouldn't exist, or let them practice and let others hate them for practicing. I feel like there was only one great way there, so we're now going to explore the chosen ethics system, utilitarianism. I am far from the first to apply the utilitarian system in regards to homosexuality. In fact, in the Research Handbook of Law and Utilitarianism by Bassi Boynet, he asserts that historically utilitarianism played a prominent role in challenging the dominant disapproving point of view on homosexuality. So apparently people have been using utilitarianism to defend homosexuality for years, and it is a good system to use. As I have shown, all other systems don't support it in a perfect way. Even virtue ethics ended with "you should love them." Another teaching from Christ is in Matthew 19:5. For this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united with his wife, and the two will become one flesh. So while Christ says that you should love everyone, he also teaches that a man and his wife should come together. With the goal of producing the most good, utilitarianism needs to look at things that go against homosexuality or are causing the unethical treatment of them. Until very recently, homosexuals were unable to get married. This issue regularly got heated among people with differing viewpoints. The question then became, would more good be pushed out if homosexuals were to be able to get married, or if marriage remained between man and a woman? In the end, the court decided that banning homosexual marriage would violate the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment to the United States Constitution. The Supreme Court realized that a portion of the population was being marginalized, and with a minority not being able to enjoy the same liberties as the main population, decided to do something about it. Extending certain freedoms to the entire population instead of just the majority is a good that was pushed down to a larger portion of the population when the Supreme Court legalized gay marriage. Yes, this made many people very angry, but in the end, utilitarianism is not about preventing anger. It is about maxing the good for the most amount of people, period. And giving more freedoms to more people is the greater good. In the past 15 years, there have been huge strides in the ethical treatment towards homosexuals. Using a utilitarian system will ensure that there are more strides forwards until there is a complete equality. Is this a possibility? Yes. Is it a probability? I think it would be naive to say yes. The hope is that we keep moving forward in the ethical treatment towards homosexuality. And I believe that using the utilitarianistic way, that system approach to it, is the best way. Here's a bibliography of all my sources. And thank you so much.